So welcome, everyone. We're going to talk about this red line, this supposed red line between advocacy journalism and non-biased objective reporting. So please welcome the three members of the panel who will help us discuss this over the next 40 or 50 minutes or so. Patrícia Campos Mello is a reporter at large with Brazil's Folha de São Paulo newspaper. She's also an associate research scholar at Columbia University looking into electoral disinformation. Oh, welcome, Patricia. Now, Kiundu Waweru has written widely on human stories and solutions-based and development journalism at Kenya's The Standard newspaper, and then as a freelancer for The Nation and for The Mail and Guardian in South Africa. He's also the project manager, East Africa coverage of conservation and wildlife journalism project at the Internews Earth Journalism Network in Kenya. Welcome. The final member of our panel, you've welcomed you this morning. He's Peter Limbourg. He is Director General of Deutsche Welle, Germany's state-funded international broadcaster. Your panel. So thank you all for being here and joining us on this panel. Let's interrogate the premise. So let's start with you, Patrícia Campos Mello. Does good reporting have to be unbiased?
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's a real honor. Good reporting has to at least try to be unbiased. I mean, of course, we know impartiality is impossible, but I think journalism, and when I say journalism, I'm talking about reporters. If you're an opinion writer, if you're an anchor, that's different. But if you're a reporter, you can do activism, but it's not the same as an activist. The way you're gonna fight for what you believe is doing accurate reporting about topics that are important, about democracy, about voting, about access to health. So I do think that we have to keep these two things separate. We have to cooperate, activists and journalists. And activism is essential for journalism because activists are on the front lines. They're seeing what's happening. So it's really important that we learn from them. But it's also important that we keep it separate. You know, that I'm not going to get into that, but that does not mean false equivalency or, giving two sides to things that do not have two sides, right? But I do think that at least we have to try to be unbiased.
Okay. So, Kiundu Waweru, as an environmental journalist, you clearly have an agenda. So, can you advocate for a cause like environmentalism while remaining unbiased?
It's a yes and no. Because to become an environmental journalist, you are a journalist first. And so you'll have to stay true to the rules of journalism, like first to be objective, and you're not an environmentalist, you're not an activist to begin with. But as you move on and you want to specialize, you find that it's contextual. There are sometimes you want to tell a story, but it's not possible to tell the story without becoming an activist. For instance, and not you don't say you're an activist, but if you look back, you'll see that's what's happened. Because where I come from, in Kenya and in Africa, access to information is really not very easy, and especially from the politicians. So you have to really push, to get this information for you to be able to tell your story. And to me, that seems you have to do a lot of lobbying, a lot of pushing, just so to be able to tell your story. But yes, I agree. You need to stay true, to the facts. And as Patricia says, sometimes when you're telling a story about and denialist. For instance, you can't give the both sides equal treatment. Sometimes you have to make a decision to tell the story without giving so much credence on the other side.
Because just on that point, when we talk about abstract concepts like being objective, right? You say you can't give the other side when there is no other side. There cannot be any false equivalence. But this is where it gets sticky, isn't it? This is where they start shouting about media bias and what about us? What about our truth? We live in a post-Trump era now, and do we acknowledge that there are other truths out there?
Well, there's no two sides for facts. Some people say the earth is flat. That is not a side, that is a lie, right? Or when you had, I'm just remembering, during the Obama campaign, they had in a story, some people say that Obama was born in Kenya. That is not right. That is not another side. So when you're doing this, when you're saying, climate change is a hoax, that is false equivalence. In that sense, if we're going to lose some readers because they think we're being biased against people who believe the earth is flat, I'm so sorry.
Bye-bye. So Peter Limbourg, how does a journalistic organization like Deutsche Welle, how does it feel about this red line? When, for instance, DW openly advocates for certain things, democracy, diversity, inclusion, does that make your journalists biased advocates? Doesn't appear to be. You've been silenced.
Here. Yes.
All right.
Okay. Now better. Yeah, it works. Thank you very much. I think we have a clear position that there are points where we could be advocates or activists as journalists, but this is only when it comes to human rights and democracy and tolerance. So this is something where we say, yes, we are advocating this. But when it comes to certain topics, I always try to tell the people there are enough activists in the world, there are enough polarization in the internet. Let's try to get the facts. And I think we heard this morning, it is important that we should it's not about balance, it's about truth, yes. But then I also say, yes, it's about truth, and it's not necessarily about opinion. And I think these things have to be strictly separated. And yes, we cannot exclude the fact that, for instance, if we look at the US and the polarization, that there are people who have a different view of the world. And we have to approach them by getting into discussion. If we exclude them and say, okay, you believe the earth is flat, get out of the discussion, I think we will not have an effect. Then we will stay within the groups who believe that the earth is round, and we will not reach the others. And my fear is if we get too much into activism as journalists or advocacy, then we will help to make this world even more polarized.
See, here's the point on that issue. If you try to engage the other side, I'm not saying it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, but if that's what you're trying to do, we have a point of view, democracy is a fantastic thing, come and join us. That's advocacy.
I wouldn't say it's advocacy. I mean, it's if you put it from a political point of view, yes, maybe. But we are journalists. I mean, we have to bring in facts. We have to report what's happening. We have to highlight real people and show their way of living and how it affects them. And if we report about pollution in whatever country, that doesn't necessarily make us a climate activist, but it's a real problem for people. And it's not for us to take position whether a climate activist is doing everything right or the government is everything right. First of all, we have to make a decision, report on the fact, report on the things that affect people.
Can I add something? I was just thinking about including people who have a different worldview. For example, Brazil had a big refugee crisis with the Venezuelans. Venezuela is in a very difficult situation. So we had in the border several xenophobic protests and violence, and this was in the Amazon region. Everybody who was covering this was covering as, okay, there's violent, aggressive, ignorant, xenophobic people attacking Venezuelans, which in a way might be true, but at the same time, if you not endorsing xenophobia, but covering the impact of the refugees towards the local communities who have, their hospitals that are already not good and they're, overpopulated, and the schools, it is a way of acknowledging the other and not only, imposing your condescending view as in, I am this illustrated elite who is against ignorant, racist people. So I think, in a sense, that's something that we could do more.
So let's pick up that with you, Kiundu, because can reporting be unbiased in the face of conflicting issues and priorities, as Patricia was just sort of highlighting there? Whose truth gets told, for instance, when Western scientists tell Brazil or African countries they must stop making their living from precious resources that belong to the country or the local community, that they belong not to those local communities, but to the world? So whose truth gets told then?
That's a very interesting question. I think the truth belongs to the people, the locals, when it comes to resources. And I find the work that I do about conservation, environment, and wildlife in East Africa. We build the capacity of the journalists to be able to tell these stories better, because we work in very difficult circumstances. Because most of us in our newsrooms, we don't specialize. When you go to college, you're trained to become a journalist first. But there are development organizations like Internews who come to give you those tools to be able to tell this story. And what I'm seeing while we're doing this story on an environment is that there are a lot of conflicts in these communities with the conservationists and with the governments and even donors, as you said, because conservation has been taken as, it looks like, so elitist, and people have been left out of the discussion. But if you bring the local to understand that these are resources that needs to be protected for themselves and for the future generations, then they'll take part in these. I don't know if this answers your questions. So I think the resources do not, in a large extent, they belong to the world, but they'll start with the locals to believe in what they have. And then for, like in the case of East Africa, then they can invite the world and like in tourism, because if we're killing the big five, the lions, the elephants, because they have raided our farms, for instance, then we would have the world coming to us, with the tourist euros and dollars, if you like. So it's about us, the people, and it's about the journalists telling the stories of environment, of conservation, but around the people, the local people.
Okay, so all three of you have made that same point about the necessity of bringing people in. You don't just bash people over the head, you explain and outline. So Peter Limbourg, with that example where we have the elitists, if I can use that term, the scientists in the West telling a country, a community, don't log, don't hunt, don't fish, because these are not yours, these are ours. Does a press organization have a responsibility to make sure that not just the global picture is told, but the picture for these smaller communities whose livelihoods, whose day-to-day livings depend on doing exactly what the scientists say they must not do?
Yes, I think we have the responsibility, and that's what we try to do with constructive journalism. That means that we try to show what are the possible solutions for this particular problem, that, for instance, getting rid of wood in the Amazonas or fishing somewhere where the fish should stay. And at the end, we have to not point fingers, because we as Westerners are responsible in a huge way for the crisis the world is in. Our fishing companies fish the fish, and there's not much left in some regions for the people. And then we go and say, no, preserve the fish. Same as with the woods, same with getting energy out of the soil, which we use for our benefit, and then point fingers and say, no, you can't do this. How can we possibly say to people in India, if we talk about climate change, no, if you take an air conditioner, this is not good. I mean, they have more than 40 or 50 degrees. Who are we to say? But on the other hand, we now are maybe in a position where we had the benefit of science, and then we have to explain that we have to find other solutions which also take care of these people who live there and have to make a living. So I think it's constructive journalism which can support these answers, and which is a part of the solution.
And so, Patricia, the answer to so many of these questions tends to be, it's complicated, right? But in a complicated story where the facts are open to interpretation, do journalists with a point of view have a duty to report all of those facts, or just those that support their narrative, and leaving the other guy to tell their story?
It's an excellent question. I think, for instance, in terms of maybe science, when something scientific is still evolving, right? We don't know yet. Maybe we should be transparent and say there's these studies that say this, and these studies are like very respected and golden, I forgot the word in English, golden rule studies. And then there are these other studies saying this. And then you can listen to specialists. But I think there's a big risk of filtering the sources you're going to use, which is what you just said, right? So that it corroborates your thesis. I think the best way, when there's not a fixed conclusion for an issue, is to present the evolving studies or research. But that's when it's factual. When it's opinion, it's, one thing is talking about climate change versus climate change deniers. The also is talking about people who support abortion rights and people who don't.
Peter Limbourg, so I'll just, on that point about whose narrative in a confused picture, where it's all truth, but perhaps pointing in different directions, how do you steer a course through that? Because what Patricia is talking about is, well, there's this and there's this, but it's a bit nuanced, it's a bit complicated, and we live in an age, if I might say so, of anti-nuance. We don't want, well, it's a bit of this and it's a bit of that. An audience wants, right, it's this and it's that. This is what I think. You turn around to them and say, it's complicated. Here's 4,000 words. Here's an hour-long documentary you've got to sit through. Does that get readers? Does that get viewers?
I mean, journalism is complicated. I mean, it's not an easy job. And if we only think that we can provide simple answers, let's do the politicians if they want to, or let this do the populists. But this is not our business. We have to show the full picture. And that means that it is complicated and that we have to address people with facts. Now comes the question, how do we do this? We can do it also that people understand us better. And there we are in, basically, we have to fulfill our mission better, because obviously in some parts we don't do this. So it's too complicated because people don't understand it. So we have to work on our side. Why is this so? I mean, we can't blame the people when they say we don't understand you. Then we have to think, why is it so? And let's say, okay, we have formats where we are we explain very long, we have documentaries, we have long texts, but we also have TikTok channels. And for instance, our colleague Jafar Abdul Karim, which you can see his show at 2.30, which he's recording, very interesting show. He is an anchor of Deutsche Welle, and he has now a TikTok channel. And in the first month, he made 70 million views. And I think he transports also values, he transports information, which is crucial. And so we have to see how can we deliver our stories and how do we address people. It's a simple thing at the end.
So just sticking with this point, Kiundu, when the magazines and the newspapers that you write for, you're an environmental journalist, you have a point of view, people are reading it and you because of that. So do you therefore feel a pressure in a commercial environment to do the stories that sell, to do the stories that are simpler to explain, that people are going to read? Because if nobody reads it, you're not getting paid.
Actually, I'm not actively in the newsroom, although I've done this. And what Peter Limbourg said that as DW, they'll go out of their way not to just tell the political story, but to go deeper, to give the stories analysis and context, to quote studies. It's not always very easy where I come from. One, because of dwindling revenues, like everybody is talking about the earlier panels, legacy media is struggling, right now, and that has seen most of us, leave the newsrooms. But I'm at a privileged, position, because to answer your question, probably I pass those skills, to practicing journalists who are there, and as I said, with minimal revenue, no advertisement money, you find that most newsrooms won't fund for you to go and deep those, deeper explainer, stories, constructive, journalism. So I work for a media developing organization that at least is able to build these, capacities. And what I can see is that for the 3 years we've been doing this, you find that most environmental stories have been relegated to a filler or somewhere in between the newspaper, and most environmental stories that get to see the light of day are following a disaster.
Right.
So it's very difficult to be able to tell this story in a way that you break the science and make it about people. You need to first be an empowered journalist, and you also need an editor who understands, the science of climate change. So I've seen, yes, we've been able to do this, and I can see a lot of, impact stories, especially when you tell that story with a solutions lens, because most times as journalists, we believe that when it bleeds, it leads. But I think, as in my country, TikTok, WhatsApp, and Twitter breaks the news. So when you bring the news in the morning, the new story breaks in the evening, you need to give it more context in the evening when you bring the news, but that doesn't happen.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So,
No, just wanted to add something which I think it's interesting. I think we have to use social media in order to amplify the reach, in the sense that when you say a journalist is an activist, The best activism that the journalist can do is not going on Twitter and having, hashtag my president is a genocide. No, you can get your stories and other people's stories and share on social media because it's huge. It's much larger, the audience you're going to get. But you're sharing stories. You're sharing facts. You're not telling people what you think. You're saying, this is what happened in the hospital XYZ. This is what's happening with the budget. This is what's happening with the environment. And then you reach a wider audience without becoming, just a distributor of opinions or something.
Understood. So what happens then if the story appears less complicated? What happens if the story appears to be black and white? For instance, with the invasion of Ukraine. We presume then that the story is Russia was wrong to invade Ukraine. Is it then okay for journalists to advocate for innocent Ukraine against nasty Russia? Let's start with you, Peter Limbourg at Deutsche Welle.
Yes, I think the one thing is why somebody is acting and analyzing this. This is one part. But there is a clear fact that the Russian army invaded Ukraine. And so that's 100% clear who is the aggressor. And now the question whose sentiments are in danger, who is afraid of NATO or something. Nothing in the whole world gives a state a right to invade another state if he has not been attacked from there. So also other invasions in the past have been wrong, which have been delivered on this basis. So I think there is a clear fact, and now you see all the victims on the ground, and there are facts, they are real.
But here's the thing, and I'd like to bring you in on this, Patricia. In the fog of war, we know that one of Russia's tactics when dealing with the media is to say, first of all, it wasn't us, it was probably them, we probably have a bit of proof, but you're not listening to us. Do we have, as independent journalists, having a black and white situation, do we have an obligation to investigate the Russian claims when it is so difficult when bombs are falling?
Well, one thing I think, some facts are non-negotiable. Russia invaded Ukraine, so it's a fact.
Okay,
so
done.
You're just establishing this, and you're showing people are dying, right? Then one of the things that we should be doing, and I think the media did, and it was good, was pre-bunking and debunking information operations, which are huge, and in the case of Russia, it's a big component since Crimea, but since ever. So in that sense, of course, before saying, it's a lie that the Russians are saying their biological labs, sponsored by Bill Gates, they develop weapons. You can check that. It's good that you check every single thing, and once you check it and you then debunk it, of course, being careful not to amplify it. So you have to be really careful not to amplify it while trying to debunk it. But I think in the times we're living in, especially in wars today, in which information operations are a huge part of it, you do have, it's a special coverage, you do have the duty to investigate claims and to make it clear that if that's the case, they're part of, a communications, disinformation strategy.
Okay. Let's take a question. We're also being watched and listened to online. So let's take a question which I hope will appear on the video screens from one of the fellows of the Global Media Forum.
How fine is the line between journalism and activism?
So it does sound like you're all quite clear that there is a line, but how fine is that? Do you ever find yourself wondering, well, am I an activist with this piece? Am I a journalist? Have I crossed the line? Who'd like to take that?
I think, as I said, when you starting out and you're a young journalist, you just stay true to telling the story, and you saying true, to facts, and in looking for experts to really tell this story. But I think as time goes on, you become, I don't know if to use passionate about, some issues that you feel maybe you can take a stand on, and you find that reporting on a particular, beat, not meaning that you've become an activist, but with people outside, looking in, they'll see like you're becoming an activist, and I would say the answer to that is like it's a really thin, line between being a journalist and an activist. But because truth be told, sometimes as a journalist you're telling a story, but you're not giving your own opinions. But you read stories, or you will watch, documentaries or news stories, and you can tell a particular journalist or reporter will actively seek for people, that match their opinions on one, on one subject. So I think really there is a, fine line.
It's a fine line, but you're quite
thin.
clear which side of it you're on.
I had the answer given by one of our young trainees who wanted to become members of DW's team, and I also asked the question, and she said, well, it's quite simple. Journalism is about public interest, and activism is about partial interest. So I think this convinced me, and even if you have, for instance, and as long you might maybe in your position take climate activists. I mean, the majority of our profession would say they're good, they're doing it for a good cause. But as soon as you, as a journalist, are no longer critical with the climate activists, then you lost the path of journalism. For instance, we have one discussion now in Germany where climate activists who are very popular advocated, on whatever reason she did it, that it would be great to blow up a pipeline. So acting violently against oil pipelines. I mean, you have to criticize this. As soon as you, as a journalist, say, oh, well, she might not have meant it like this, or I don't know what, it's for a good cause, then I think you're in the activist corner, and then you're no longer in the journalist corner.
Let's talk about cultural differences. We talked a little earlier about when science collides with the facts on the ground. What happens when the other side of an argument conflicts with the principles espoused by your outlet, or where your premise is just rejected? I'm thinking, for instance, of child marriage, where a family might see marrying off their 11-year-old daughter as an economic necessity, or indeed. So in a situation like that, and then on the other side, we have the Western view, which is the right of children to be educated rather than helping to support their families. So do news organizations there need to advocate for Western values? Do you have a duty, or do you have a duty to give the other side of this argument?
Is that for me?
Yes. Why not?
Very easy question. No. Well, I think first of all, we have to be humble and recognize that when you're writing about another culture, another people, you're only having a partial view and a biased view, and our view is always from my case, Hispanic, middle class, so I have this filter. So you have to be really careful when you're reporting or writing about this, and taking into consideration that you're always only gonna have a partial view and biased view because of the way you're. And then the best thing is to listen to people from the country, that have these cultures. Having said that, if you have, let's say, in a particular country, it is a tradition to kill babies that are women because, you have to give the dowry. I don't think you have to, maybe you do not want to impose your view, but you can describe it as what it is, as in murdering babies, right? Because they are born female.
And do you have to hear from them why it is they do this?
I think it's interesting. Yes, I think it's, can you explain in your culture, why is that part of the culture?
In your example of child marriage, I think we have to acknowledge it's not some kind of a Western value, it's universal values of humanity. And it's something every country, mostly every country, has signed, that you cannot force a young girl to marry an old man. It's against everything which is in UN charters and whatever. So I think we have to be very careful. Where is it traditionally that maybe women wear scarves? Fine, okay. But there we have something which is really against every human value in the world. So, and I think, yes,
Forgive me, let me push back on that. You say it's against every human value in the world. I'm sure everyone here agrees with you, but it's clearly not, because there are vast swathes of the, I say vast swathes, there are many countries in the world where child marriage is a fact of life. And to tell them that, well, we at the United Nations, we've decided that this is a bad thing. I said, yeah, but it's my daughter. We need her to marry this guy in order that we can eat, so that this can happen. How dare you tell me how we live our lives here? Who are you?
I don't think that it's only me telling them. It's also
Forgive me.
a lot of
when I say
people in
you,
the
this
community.
is the
So
don't let me get too
I
personal.
won't make you also now an advocate of child marriage, so don't worry. But I think in this case, I can convince, because first of all, I will listen to him, why he's doing it. I think it's necessary that people understand, because normally parents don't give away their kids easily. They give it away because they don't have any food for them, or that the rest might starve of the family. So this is basically normally the reason why childs are married. But we have to also tell them that it's against the will. Most of the cases are against the will of the young girls, and it's also against the interest of the young girl, because she's no longer treated as a human being. She's treated as somebody who is you can deal with. It's something which it's human trafficking in the kind of way, nothing else.
Okay, Kiundu?
Yeah, I would like to add on that. I come from a place where some of these still cultures still exist. Like in my country, we have so many, over 40 ethnic groups, and you find that there are some communities who still practice child marriages, and that actually will start with FGM, all female genital mutilation, where a girl as young as 10 years, and not all the communities in Kenya, but a few communities, and then they'll be like, ready for marriage. But we can't say because these cultures traditionally did this, then this is a good thing as a newsroom. No, we'll go and tell on that stories of universal, human, like Peter, put it. It's a humanity issue. So you won't tell, the story according. Okay, you will interview the people to get their aspects. But basically, you'll tell the story to give it perspective. And one of the things that can guide you is the laws of that particular country. Because like in my country, in as much as some communities still practice FGM, it's illegal in the country. We have a law, we have an act on it. So it's, I don't know how to exactly answer you, but we all moving from this harmful tradition, so to speak.
Understood.
And I think all the media has taken a stand to tell on a story on what is right, and to try to educate those communities.
Thank you. We'll take a quick question from online. In some countries, professionals don't need a journalism degree anymore to work as a journalist for a news organization. Do you think a journalism degree could be a way to ensure unbiased news coverage and avoid the growth of activism? Strong head shake there from Patricia. Yeah?
No, I don't think it's related. This is sort of protection of your turf, only people with the journalism. You have people who went to journalism school and they are extreme right-wing bloggers defending, Nazi theories. So,
okay, so there's a hard no there. There's a hard no there. And do we have a question from the audience? I saw a hand go up. Do you want to get to a microphone? There are microphones by the aisle there or over there. By all means, I can. All right. Oh, so I beg your pardon. All right. So so who's got a microphone? So you've got a microphone. Let's hear your question, please. Just let us know who you are and then tell us your question.
This is Amira Said. I'm a media fellow at the African Union. I'm also an environment journalist at the Egyptian Gazette newspaper. So my question is related to environment journalism. Now in Egypt, we are gearing up for COP27. And definitely, COP is not only for top leaders, also people, normal citizens, they want to understand why all these heads of state, they are gathering, they are talking. So what is the role of journalism in enhancing science communication and how to use the language that is relevant to stakeholders, I mean indigenous community? My second question, if you are talking about that there is a thin line between journalism and activism, now we have many journalists, they are now covering climate change through solutions lens. So do you think that solution journalism is also part of climate action or climate activism? Thank you.
Right. Do you want to take those?
Take the second one, okay?
Yeah. Okay.
I think, no, I don't think that solution journalism is some sort of activism. It's journalism which tried to find solutions. So I wouldn't consider it as activism. Please.
Yeah, on your first question, I think it's really very important to break down the science of the COPs and all other international convenings on climate change. And for now, as you will know, the COP this year will be in Africa, in Egypt. And there is a conversation that we need to have a pre-COP just for the media, so that they're able to meet with the COP conveners and their climate experts, and to just be able, to break it down and to even lead with the agenda of we need to make this Afro-centric COP, it's time for Africa to tell its own story when it comes to climate change, which is really devastating us. Like when you look at most of Africa is rain-fed agriculture. And when we were growing up, we knew the seasons. We knew it's the season to harvest. We knew it's the season to plant. But that is not there anymore. We can't rely on rain-fed agriculture. But yet, when you go to the communities, they will tell them about climate change. They don't understand what that is. At the other day, we were trying to talk to the many communities I spoke about in Kenya and other East African countries, to talk to these people and ask them, do you have a local name for climate change? And I think that's where we are, and we're really looking forward to this to this pre-COP that will happen not in Egypt but in another East African country, but to bring journalists from East Africa together in such a convening to just discuss how are we going to report this in a way that it resonates with people.
Okay.
And also
we're going to leave it there. Kiundu Waweru, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your questions and for your kind attention. Kiundu Waweru, Patrícia Campos Mello, and Peter Limbourg. Would you please show your appreciation?